gevangenisdrama Start-up werd geschreven door iemand die jarenlang gevangenistherapeut is geweest. Die authenticiteit kan je zien en voelen.
Kids causing issues. You know what's necessary.
In case you haven't fully appreciated, I am his father.
Start-up is based on a script by Jonathan Asser, right?
Yes, Asser, yeah.
And he's been a prison therapist for years. Mm-hmm. How did that script end up with you, and why did you decide to make a film out of it?
The script came to me through my company and indirectly through a Scottish novelist called Alison Kendi, who was teaching Jonathan at a creative writing course. And she said that there's a young writer who's a poet, but he's never written a screenplay before, but it's quite interesting, you should check it out. And so we checked it out and thought there's something really very strong, a very strong voice in this work.
But what does a poet do in a prison?
Well, I think he started off as a poet, then he realised that then he became a therapist. And he went in there, and he's the right person to ask, but he went into prison as a poet, doing something, interacting with prisoners, and found himself engaging with the guys much more than he thought he would, and he wanted to stay in there and felt he could help, and basically created a kind of therapy which is much more about not being afraid of anger and learning to de-escalate anger rather than hiding from it. And there's more confrontation. It's a very brave thing to do. He goes right into the kind of lion's den, as it were, and asks people who have a history of violence to almost get violent, which is very interesting. And he's better to explain it than me. But all the people that I met who he had worked with were very incredibly articulate, and it seemed to be very effective in terms of them dealing with the things they needed to deal with.
The very first time Eric sits down at a group session, it almost made me cry.
Okay, wow.
Was I supposed to?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I've cried at all sorts of parts of this film, so each time it's a slightly different thing. But I mean, it made you cry because you felt. I'd love to know why it made you cry, or almost made you cry, because you felt something for him, or there was something good about him.
Not just him. It's about the whole group, and the fact that they all desperately were looking for some sort of salvation. Maybe not salvation. That's too Christian a word, but well, a future maybe, whatever.
Well, I love the group scenes, and the amazing thing about the group scenes is that everyone embodied their characters and the dynamic in those group scenes were my favourite scenes to shoot. And one of the reasons was because we shot the film sequentially. Normally, in a film, you'd have the group scenes, and they'd be shot over 2 days because they're all in the one room. But I went back every 5 days to this room, and I had these great guys who I hardly saw for the rest of the movie, all improvising the hell out of the material, as well as some great text from Jonathan. And the dynamic was so alive, and it was a joy to be participating in, because there was so much drama and so much kind of interest in all these things. So it was like a kind of. It was a sort of special moment in the schedule whenever we had our 3 hours in the group room scene to shoot, And one of the things that's really interesting is that when we rehearsed and auditioned, we did some mock group scenes with Jonathan and some of the guys that his former prisoners, and one or two of them got very, very real and extremely dramatic, and you could feel the enormous tension build up, and then the incredible de-escalation as well. And I've seen things in films where things are escalated, and that's very regular. But I've very rarely seen them sort of the climb down and the de-escalation. And it was one of the things I thought was so incredible when I saw it happening.
You have to help him.
Big rat.
So this is where you open up to me and build trust.
He's suffered enormous emotional trauma.
Because it's based on Jonathan's script, who was also a prison therapist. Oliver, the character, he sort of must have been like Jonathan, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting character, although he's only in the margins of this film. Why?
Well, because the story is, essentially, the story is a sort of father-son reunion story in all the ways it can be. But the therapy and the intervention of that group in his life, and to some extent in his father's life, is a really important part of what might happen to Eric and how Eric might be able to kind of come out the other side in some way as a more functioning person. And I think Oliver, and the fact that Oliver is in his own way kind of needs the prison almost more than the prison needs him, and is, you know, has got a lot of inbuilt violence in him, which is, you know, and Rupert, you know, studied Jonathan in action, as it were, and you know, and there was a very open exchange between them about how to kind of portray this character. And Jonathan is very, you know, Jonathan sort of says that one of the reasons that he feels that he can identify with people in the prison that he worked with more than most is because he thinks he's, you know, he's psychotic himself. You know, so he's very avert about that. Jonathan has a very disarming honesty about dealing with the truth, and Rupert and Jonathan interacted a lot, and myself, I was involved in that process as well. I think he is a third, very much a third part of the story. Yeah. And you know, in terms of the balance of things, I mean, I quite like the fact that he disappears at the end, that you know, and you're left for the father and son really needing to be. But I think up until then, it feels like you know, the balls are pretty much left you know, there all the time. Yeah. True. I actually thought he has almost more of a relationship with Eric than his father does, really, at certain points in the movie.
Definitely, and even I like the fact that during the sessions when there's violence, he just looks down, stands between them.
That's what Jonathan does, and he's seeing it in action. It's incredible. You just stand there and you absorb all of that anger, and you don't, and somehow or other, you don't get killed.
You don't. They don't hit him.
And it deflects it, and it defuses the situation. And that's a technique that he's learned, which is I think it's quite a brave thing to do. But it's all about trust, and as a result of that trust, the people Jonathan works with trust him totally, and that's how the whole thing can work. You know?
And that's probably what made me cry, or almost made me cry, because I like selfless people.
Well, sacrifice and selflessness is a good thing, you know, and I think that's a. I'm touched by the fact that it touched you.